Well, the Labour Party is heading for a landslide victory in Britain's general election, consigning the ruling Conservatives to their worst result in history, according to the official exit poll. Now, as voting ended across Britain at 10 p.m. local time, the poll projected a stunning Labour majority in the House of Commons of 170 seats, the largest held since Tony Blair's famous win back in 1997. But the scale of the predicted win means Labour leader Keir Starmer looks certain to be anointed Britain's 58th Prime Minister this morning, ending 14 years in the political wilderness for his Labour Party. John joins us live from Westminster with all the latest updates from Ground Zero. John, is it fair to say that the Conservatives are on track for the party's worst defeat since at least 1906?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. These exit polls that were published, as you say, directly after voting finished here at 10 o'clock local time, that's just over 4.5 hours ago. The exit polls show that the Conservatives might be on track to get 131 seats. Now, that is significantly lower than the 365 that they won five years ago. So going from 365 to somewhere in the region of 130 shows you just how badly the Conservatives are expected to do. Worth pointing out as well that these exit polls normally are very accurate. They come within a few seats of getting the overall results right. So although what we're seeing now is the results being counted in the different constituencies around the UK, we are very much expecting that the makeup of this building behind me, you can just about make it out Parliament through the darkness there. The makeup in there is expected to be a very heavy Labour majority, as you rightly point out, probably their biggest majority since Tony Blair took power back in 1997.
John, some Tories are simply relieved that the result was not even worse. Some pre-election polls actually suggested that the party could effectively be wiped from the electoral map.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There were some polls saying that actually the Conservative Party might get somewhere in the region of 70 or 75 seats. So the fact that they are potentially going to get more like 130, well, actually, that is a relief for some. And that seems almost unthinkable, doesn't it? This huge party that have been in power for 14 years have been really struggling just to hold on to that support. And plenty of people I spoke to on polling day said actually they weren't really voting for another party. They were voting against the Conservative Party. It seems like there is plenty of people who blame the Conservatives for the problems in the UK at the moment, whether that is the faltering economy or the high cost of living, or even things like there not being enough houses and that driving up the house prices and meaning people can't afford to buy homes. This huge range of issues. A lot of people say, well, the Conservatives are to blame for that, and they've gone out and they've voted for other people. We've even seen tonight the Reform Party, led by the divisive figure of Nigel Farage. He's probably best known to our viewers as the man really who was one of the driving forces behind Brexit. Well, his party have picked up a lot of votes. Those on the right wing of the Conservative Party, they have voted for reform instead, saying that actually they offer a breath of fresh air when it comes to right-wing politics. So the Conservatives really are struggling all around. And as the results come in, it just seems like time and time again, the Conservatives are losing seats.
But John, I have to be honest, this time around, none of my WhatsApp groups have lit up with election snark or even election memes. Liz Truss's bowing out from Downing Street excited more WhatsApping than this supposedly once-in-a-generation vote. Have things been different at your end?
Yeah, I think because the polls here have predicted a large Labour win ever since Rishi Sunak called the election, because those polls have shown that the Labour Party were due to do well, that perhaps has limited the interest in it, certainly the international interest in it, because it seemed to many people like a done deal. For the Labour Party, they had to go out there and had to say, well, actually, until you vote for it, nothing's a done deal. So they were encouraging people to go out and vote. I think actually when in terms of your WhatsApp group lighting up and lots of memes being sent around, probably that was all taking place when Rishi Sunak actually announced the election 6 weeks ago, standing in the pouring rain outside Downing Street. It's perhaps fitting that the weather forecast here is for torrential rain to start again in a few hours. So it might be that when he actually leaves Downing Street, it's in the rain as well, and we see a new leader come in. And I would imagine Keir Starmer will have an umbrella with him, not wanting to repeat that performance of getting soaking wet.
Well, let's see how the day unfolds. Interestingly, though, according to YouGov, 48% of Labour voters say that they just want the Tories out. 13% think the country needs a change. But what's the general sentiment? What have you been picking up on months of reporting?
Yeah, I think there is a feeling that the Conservatives have lost support as much as anyone else has gained support. Certainly the Labour Party, not really as popular as in previous years. Keir Starmer coming into this with a fairly low approval rating, but very much people just keen to get rid of the Conservatives. That seems to have been the message, that people are more willing to vote for almost anybody so long as it means that the Conservatives will be out of government. And as these results come through, and I'm just looking at some of them now, we are just seeing seat after seat in the different constituencies where the Conservatives are losing, and they're being won mostly by Labour, sometimes by other parties like the Liberal Democrats or Reform as well.
Right. Also, it's crucial to note that only a measly 5%, as per YouGov, are voting Labour because they agree with the Labour policies. That's just a meagre 5%. But in terms of the current leads, I must mention to our viewers that the Labour is ahead by 7. They've made gains by 17 seats. The Conservative trailing minus 20 from their last report card at the moment. Keir Starmer heading for that landslide victory, it seems, as we've been discussing, John. But you know, while inflation in Britain has come down, you were mentioning, people are frustrated with the cost of living crisis. Take us through some of the key issues that British voters have taken to the polls this time around.
Well, certainly the economy. We've been talking to political experts during the election campaign, and they've been saying that the economy has been dominating the proceedings. And like you say as well, the cost of living crisis, high inflation, a feeling that the Conservatives weren't doing enough to help working class people. Certainly all of those issues have been very much at the top of the agenda for many people. I think we've also seen as well people concerned about public services here in the UK, things like the National Health Service, maybe not having the kind of support and the kind of investment it needs, long waiting times for people to see doctors and to see surgeons. So those are the sorts of things people have been voting on. And the Labour Party, who we are expecting to make up the next government now, well, they've got a lot of work to do when they get into power. And Keir Starmer walks into Downing Street, just about half a mile down the road behind me from where I am now.
In fact, Keir Starmer has had some stringent policies as well. He says that his version of the Labour Party is pro-business. What are some of the most significant changes you've seen that the Labour Party has gone through in comparison to the leadership under Jeremy Corbyn and Ed Miliband?
Yeah, well, certainly with Jeremy Corbyn, it was a very left-leaning Labour Party, and for a lot of people in the middle who would describe themselves as sort of centrists and the sort of voters who wouldn't see themselves as particularly left-wing, but certainly wouldn't normally vote Conservative, they were almost left with nobody to vote for. So this has been a Labour Party moving back into the middle, trying to pick up more votes. And like you say, in terms of business as well, this is a Labour Party that is very much trying to reassure the City of London and reassure the big employers here as well that it is a Labour Party that is very business focused and business centric to try and restart that economy as well, because of course the economy here has not been doing so well. So the Labour Party are going to need to make sure that the kind of policies they enact help lead to overall economic growth.
Right. In fact, for many in Britain, the country has long felt stagnant or broken from the economy and even public institutions like the crumbling National Health Service. The Labour Party says that they are going to cut waiting lists drastically. Does the British public have any faith in their promises?
Well, I think the Labour Party would argue, yes, the public has faith because look at the majority that the Labour Party are on course to get. So certainly as much as people were voting because the Conservatives were unpopular, you don't win a landslide like this unless some of your policies have gone down well with the public. So certainly I would think the Labour Party are going to argue that people have given them a strong mandate to govern, and that's what we're going to see. Of course, they now need to deliver on what they promised, bring down those waiting lists and help improve the NHS in general. It's certainly a very key issue to a lot of voters here.
As always, John, thanks so much for joining us with those updates from Ground Zero. Long night ahead for you there, but we will, of course, revert to you for regular updates. Also joining us, senior journalist and former BBC editor Nicholas Nugent at the moment. Thanks so much, Nicholas, for making time for us. Britain has been mired in a cost of living crisis. Real wages have flatlined for a decade. Prices have spiraled for utilities and food. I think it's fair to say that Rishi Sunak will be bidding farewell to number 10 Downing Street, as per the exit poll projections.
Well, yes, indeed. It looks like it's going to be a very substantial victory for the Labour Party, as your correspondent was saying. No surprises there. Our exit polls, I know you have right to be suspicious of exit polls, but so far the 30 or so results we've had so far rather bear out the predictions. So we're looking like a massive Labour victory, not quite what you would call a supermajority, but not far short of that. So really quite a stunning result. Certainly one of the more exciting general elections I can remember because of the size of the victory that it looks as if the Labour Party will get.
Right. In fact, it's going to be the only Labour landslide after Tony Blair. But is it a fair assessment that Rishi Sunak has been left trying to coax a disillusioned Conservative base just to turn up at the ballot box to prevent what he wants will be a Labour supermajority in the House of Commons, but he's so far failed to do so?
Well, yes, indeed. He had an uphill battle to fight, and you could argue that he or the Conservative Party are suffering for the sins of the previous leaders, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss in particular. But we've had 14 years of Conservative rule with 5 different leaders. And I feel a bit sorry for Rishi Sunak. He got the short end of the straw. He is having to fight against all the odds to win the election for Conservatives. It's not going at all well. But let me make another point. This is not just a straight fight between Conservative and Labour. It may look like that, but 2 significant things that have shown up during the early results, and we're only less than 5 hours into the results, so we haven't got very many results. One is the way that the Reform Party, which is another right-wing party, have undermined the Conservative vote. So it's not all Labour capturing seats from the Conservatives, but they're right-wing extremists, the Nigel Farage party, if you understand what I mean there, really quite an extreme right-wing party closely associated with Brexit, taking us out of the European Union. Now, that party is doing very well in terms of vote share. They've only so far won 1 seat, and the prediction is they won't
13.
win more than about 13, or they may win up to 13, perhaps I should put it like that. So the Reform Party is quite a significant factor in this election, but also the other smaller party, the Liberal Democrats, who are strong in my area, for example, of west of England, they're doing much better than expected. So I think we should take note of the other parties, Reform, the Liberal Democrats, and the regional parties like the Scottish Nationalist Party. So they're all taking votes, well, not all taking votes from the Conservative, but they are affecting the outcome overall. So whilst I don't think there's any doubt that Labour will win with a substantial majority, we need, or at least I need, to look closely at the regional issues and the extent to which other parties play a role. In my constituency, for example, if the Conservative is to lose, be defeated, it'll be by the Liberal Democrat, not by the Labour,
Right.
because Labour are way, way behind.
So in terms of the Lib Dems, it seems that the gimmicky campaign has indeed worked out. But Nigel Farage, Nicholas, it's not totally unexpected. It was predicted that the Reform UK is going to chip away the Conservative vote share. But it's interesting to see, as opposed to Europe, France, especially with Marine Le Pen, the UK was veering more towards the left. But the resurgence of the Reform UK party, it does indicate that there is somewhere an audience for the far right.
Yes, you're right. But I think I wouldn't. I mean, you're right to be drawing the comparison with France, Italy, the Netherlands, which have all gone to the right. Nobody could say that Britain is going to the right. It's very much going to the left. But the interesting thing about the Reform Party, it's a new party. It's just won its first member of Parliament. But yesterday, the prediction was they would get 1 seat in Parliament. Now, after the exit poll, we're told they could get up to 13 seats. So that's what's interesting here. But you can't, they're a long way from power, the right wing in Britain. So we really are countering the trend that you've seen in those other 3 countries I mentioned. Britain is going to the left. There's no question about that.
Right.
Labour will be the alternative government, will be the new government. But those of us who watch these things closely do take an interest in how Reform are doing, which shows that there is, it's the damage Reform are doing to the Conservative Party that is of interest, because it's not all Labour taking the votes from Conservatives, it's Reform as well. So they are being attacked from both sides, you could say, and they're not doing very well.
Right. In fact, Rishi Sunak has staked much of his manifesto and his campaign on the controversial plan to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda. Immigration is rising despite post-Brexit promises, though, that this would fall. You think Rishi has failed to deliver on some crucial promises, and that the British public has now lost faith in the Tory promises?
Well, I think that's definitely the case, yes. He's been promising this Rwanda scheme to deter illegal immigrants ever since he took power, and he has failed to deliver. Not a single person, or maybe 1 single person, has been deported to Rwanda. But the scheme wasn't popular. The scheme wasn't popular partly because it seemed rather anti-humanitarian, and
Indeed.
because it was challenged by the courts, both in Britain and potentially in Europe as well. It doesn't mean that Keir Starmer, the expected new Prime Minister, has all the answers. Far from it. I don't think he has, but he'll take a different sort of approach, as he's made quite clear, and he will try and ease the scheme for legal immigration, so that people can be processed, can apply to come to Britain rather than sail over on small boats. But let me just say, illegal immigration is only a part of the problem, because the Conservatives have come undone also because of legal immigration. What they call net immigration has been well into the 700,000s.
Yes.
That's the excess of incomers, legal incomers, over those going to live abroad for one reason or another. So that's another problem. And that's all to do with the economy. It's to do with the demand for certain types of worker in Britain that we don't seem to have,
Yes.
care workers in particular, and fruit pickers. And it's also to do with students coming and perhaps bringing their families. So all these issues of the economy, you can't just stop legal immigration. You have to adjust the levers in a number of ways. And you were saying earlier that the result of this election is very much about the state of the economy. Yes, and this is how the state of the economy plays on to the whole immigration debate. Very, very complex issues there. But at least Keir Starmer knows that this is something he has to give early attention to, or he will risk coming undone for the very same reasons that Rishi Sunak has.
Yes, indeed. Also, Nicholas, before we wrap, Rishi Sunak's proposal for mandatory national service for 18-year-olds, you think that likely hurt the Tories in retrospect?
I'm not sure it hurt it. It was a bit of a gimmick. It won support in some areas. We knew it would never happen because here he was presenting it for the first time during the election campaign, and it was widely expected that Conservatives would lose. So it didn't seem like a serious issue. I think perhaps more serious, you might look at the whole issue of defence spending. Conservatives were committed to increasing defence spending. Remember, we have a major war on in Europe, which threatens even Britain. I mean, it threatens Western Europe. So there's a great concern about security of the state. So Rishi Sunak came up wanting to increase defence spending from a little over 2% to 3% of GDP. And Labour could do nothing but agree. The only difference was they wouldn't put a timescale on it. So security is, frankly, a more relevant concern politically to the people of Britain and the political parties than the issue of national service. That, as I say, we haven't had national service in Britain since 1959, and it's not going to come back soon. So I don't think that made much impact. I think your previous point about immigration in general and illegal immigration in particular, those were much more relevant factors in bringing the Conservatives down.
Well, Nicholas, thank you so much, as always, for making time for us well into midnight. It's going to be a long night for you ahead. We will, of course, revert to you for regular updates, but always a pleasure to hear your perspective. And joining us live on the broadcast at the moment, Sai Karthik Madhabhushi, campaign head, Conservative Friends of India. Thank you so much, Sai Karthik, for joining us. I'm sorry it's not been the best night for you, clearly.
I understand it's been a challenging night for the Conservatives, and I'm still here at the count and still pretty early in the morning.
You know, for many in Britain, though, the country has long felt stagnant or broken, whether it's the economy, whether it's public institutions like the NHS, to the sewage-filled rivers and the expensive delay-ridden railways. Many voters blame the Conservative Party for this, and they seem like they have been punished at the ballot box so far. Are you prepped to head for your worst record since 1906?
I'll be honest with you. We've had a difficult few years, especially with COVID and the Ukraine war. And much before that, we were saddled with a massive debt when we took over from Labour in 2010. Fixing that through austerity has taken a significant amount of time. And cleaning up the economy is never an easy business, and it's never a short-term business. It's a long-term process. And that has to be done. And I agree with you. Some of the decisions we've had to take have been challenging and might not have gone down well with the electorate. And today's results kind of reflect that.
Sai Karthik, though, are you a little relieved that the result was not even worse as far as the exit poll projections are concerned?
In my view, I think the exit poll depends on the sampling sizes and people you talk to. I don't expect the overall outcome to change today. But I do think we will do better than what the exit polls suggest.
Right. In terms of your main issues, though, your main campaign issues, in retrospect, is there something you would have done differently?
That is a very good question. I think that would be best put to the people in charge of the national campaign. But at a local level, I think we've focused mostly on the local constituency MPs we've been supporting, especially in Northwest London, where I'm based. We've been looking at Conservative health seats and supporting them as much as we can. And I think we will do reasonably well in a couple of them. And I've just got reports that it's touch and go in one of them. But I'm hoping that we will hold the 3 Conservative MPs in Northwest London tonight.
In fact, many predict that some of Sunak's close aides, their positions of power are at stake. But in terms of your report card, let's look at the Conservative Party report card over the last 14 years. Britain has actually had the worst rate of homelessness in the developed world. And I'm actually quoting the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development here. 30% of children, they are growing up in poverty. This is what government figures show. Surely this doesn't make the Tories or Rishi Sunak proud, right? This is not the ideal legacy to leave behind.
I completely agree. And had we stuck to the plan, and if we had a little more time, we could have probably fixed it. But I agree with you. Whatever the stats are today, I don't think they are something we can be proud of.
Right, Sai Karthik, as always, thank you so much for making time for us on NDTV and joining us with those quick early comments before the results start pouring.
And the Cameron was going to stay.
With that, we're slipping into a very short break. News and updates continue in a moment.
Has taken that seat. Beth.
Yeah, Nuneaton is at one of these bellwether seats in the West Midlands.
Well, welcome to the live comprehensive coverage of the UK elections across the NDTV network. The Labour Party is expected to sweep the UK election, and number 10 Downing Street is expected to have a new entrant in Sir Keir Starmer in a few hours from now, unless there is an error of galactic proportions as far as the exit polls in the UK are concerned, which I must mention doesn't happen very often because of a margin of error less than 5%. Radhika Iyer joins us with the latest from ground zero at the moment. Radhika, the Conservatives set for the worst defeat since the year 1906?
If exit polls were to be believed, and if these early trends are indicating any such. Well, earlier, in fact, they suggested through a YouGov survey that the Conservatives are likely to win just above 66 constituency seats, but that doesn't appear to be as big a massacre and an apocalypse as predicted. However, this is going to be an extremely challenging day for Rishi Sunak and co. Some of his besties in his government, including the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, and Grant Shapps, the Foreign Minister, are expected to perhaps even lose in their constituencies. And Rishi Sunak itself in his constituency is fighting a tough battle in Richmond, again, among the first to happen in history where a sitting Prime Minister could perhaps lose. But it's too early perhaps to say such a thing until a declaration is made from the counting centre. But in Holborn, which is not far from where I am at the moment, Parmeshwar, from about a mile away from the British Parliament, where I'm coming to you live from, quiet and dull here at the Parliament, but it won't be until too long. And just a mile away is Holborn and St Pancras, which is the constituency that Keir Starmer is from, the Labour Party, who's already been there with his wife. There's a lot of cheer, as you would have seen in the visuals. He clearly is getting ready to lay his hands on the keys to enter number 10, not just for the first time, but also one with an extremely different looking Labour image. The Labour Party until 2010, 2015 was suffering from an image of being extremely leftist. Under the Jeremy Corbyn leadership, when he took over, I remember very vividly on the 12th of September 2019, again, Jeremy Corbyn was criticized for his Semitism stance, for being allegedly racist, and then he gave way to Keir Starmer to take over in the year 2020. And since, Keir Starmer has led the Labour to somewhat correct its image of being far left to perhaps progressive centre. Of course, in the last few days of campaigning, we have seen that the Labour has been issuing several statements, including their manifesto, trying to indicate very socialistic moves, very Labour-like moves. And the threat, many political experts were saying, is imagine having a Labour government with the Lib Dem forming the second largest party in the Parliament, with them being in the key opposition. And that would make Britain migrate towards a very centre, far left government. But it seems from trends that the Conservatives could well hold the second position, which will make Rishi Sunak quite relieved, considering the kind of factionism we've seen within the Conservative Party, extremely split down the middle. There are so many different camps, multiple problems to start with that Rishi Sunak inherited when he took over. There was the Partygate scandal. Yes. COVID had just decimated the UK's economy. Just after Brexit, there was, of course, the cost of living crisis, the economy in doldrums, and, of course, the party going through such huge divide within themselves. So considering all of those factors, Rishi Sunak today, if he manages to hold his seat and have the Conservative Party getting the second position, then answering to your question, Parmeshwar, yes, they will lose this election, but not perhaps as badly as Rishi would have thought.
Right, Radhika, as always, thanks so much for joining us with that crucial update. In fact, you mentioned the Lib Dems. I must mention to our viewers that Ed Davey has held a seat in Kingston, and in fact, he has held on to his seat in Kingston. The exit poll predicts the Tories will collapse to just 131 seats, as we discussed, John. The lowest total for the Tories in the party's illustrious history, which is comfortably beating its previous low of 156 back in 1906?
Yeah, and I mean, this is a very bad night, isn't it, for the Conservative Party? Somewhat of a nightmare, as we've seen the counting come in and more seats really being announced. What we're seeing is that the Labour Party are making a huge number of gains from the Conservatives. They're also losing ground to the Liberal Democrats, as you've just mentioned, also to Reform as well, as we said before. They're the more right-wing element led by the very divisive Nigel Farage, Mr. Brexit, as some people call him, someone who's stood for Parliament a number of times before and has never managed to get in. It looks like he will become an MP this time around, and certainly he is already trying to say that people voting for his party is a vote for the alternative options in UK politics, that they are shaking things up. I think that's all well that he's saying that, but of course I think the reality is that this is a landslide for the Labour Party. This is a landslide for this, as we were just hearing there, this more centrist party from 5 years ago. They've come back over from the left where they were, the left-wing policies of Jeremy Corbyn that many people simply just couldn't vote for because they didn't consider themselves to be left-wing enough, that now the Labour Party has found this more central ground, and it appears to have been something that has worked very well for Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, who we very much expect to be the next Prime Minister here in the UK.
Right, Radhika, talk to us a little more about the Lib Dem campaign. It seems that Ed Davey's gimmicky campaign has helped him as far as the polls are concerned so far.
Yes, indeed. Someone who has seen to have sort of kept very much the voter sentiment towards the centre. He has, of course, called out the Labour for its narrative that they are centre more than left. But some of their manifesto points, such as having private school fees hiked up to be able to pump that money into school education, talking increasingly about the social sector, socialistic reforms being announced by Sir Keir Starmer, all of these indicating that there are, of course, policies which indicate a left ideology, even though they are, their narrative includes that of being quite centre. Whereas on the other hand, you had the Conservatives, which of course were completely pro-Brexit. At least this chunk of the Conservative leaders just after Theresa May, and then when Boris Johnson took over, Liz Truss took over, and then Rishi Sunak, who said that there was no going back on Brexit and that they were very clear to get that going and have that red button pushed from the European Union. And so Sir Ed Davey's campaign was seen very much as if it was, although low-key, very consistent, not being one that is too braggish about certain socialistic policies that they would have otherwise considered to have declared. And his experience of being in that coalition government with David Cameron as Prime Minister and Nick Clegg as the deputy was, of course, something that went in his favour. So he has the experience of being in government. He has the experience, of course, of being that person who has not been the third, but the second lead in Britain. And all of that, it appears, has gone in his favour. Some of the constituencies, for instance, far out of North London, where I was chatting with certain voters, did feel that there was a lack of faith and trust really in either mainstream parties, which is why a third alternative, such as Sir Ed Davey's Liberal Democrats, like it happened in 2015, is something that they were considering. Also, polls indicating that Liberal Democrats could take the second position. Now, of course, this morning, quickly trends indicating the other way. It could perhaps come the third leading party, with the Conservatives still retaining the opposition position if they continued to maintain this trend of leads, which may turn out to be declared seats in the second position of more than 130, as indicated by polls.